Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. So good to be back with you on this Monday afternoon, Monday evening, perhaps where you are. Perhaps it's Tuesday morning. If you're on the other side of the date line, welcome wherever you are. We're so glad you're here with us. And if you're watching online, as many people do around the world, if you're watching the video streaming in the various places it streams, you see that they redid the studio. We got a brand new look here in the studio, and you can see it. I look completely different. Well, I think I'm the only thing that looks the same. Same sad old situation there. But everything around me looks new and improved. So if you're listening on the radio, maybe check it out later. You can see it over at our Facebook page. I'm sure they'll have a bunch of posts. A bunch of people were in here taking photographs a few moments ago, so I'm sure they're taking those to post them somewhere. And not only do we have a new and improved studio for you, man, great Monday show, a great Monday show. Second hour, we'll talk to atheists. Trent Horn will be here, and if you are an atheist person and you'd like to talk to believers, like to maybe convince us of the atheism, or at least share your view of why atheism makes more sense than belief in God, you're welcome to call. Second hour, those are always fun hours, and we really do look forward to your calls. Please don't hesitate to call. We love those conversations. They're good for all of us. This hour, we'll do the church in the news. And if you've got questions about the church in the news, you are welcome to call 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. And if you're going to do the church in the news, then you call J.D. Flynn and have him on. And he's been gracious enough to come and do this hour with us. He's the editor-in-chief and the co-founder of The Pillar, which you can find at pillarcatholic.com. Before co-founding The Pillar, J.D. was the editor-in-chief of the Catholic News Agency. Before that, chancellor of the Archdiocese of Denver. And he's got an MA in theology. He's got the JCL, which is that canon law degree. And he's just a super journalist. J.D. Flynn, thanks for being with us.
And I don't know if you know this, Cy, but I am an admiral in the Navy of the great state of Nebraska. Nobody ever mentions that one.
Congratulations on that. That must be quite an active Navy. I don't know what.
Yeah, we haven't had a meeting yet or anything that I know, so I don't know if it's a good Navy. But it's like being a Kentucky colonel, but it's way, way, way better because it's admiral.
Yeah, well, a colonel does outrank. An admiral does outrank a colonel. So congratulations on that. That is fantastic. The Navy of the Plains, as it's affectionately called.
Indeed. So something for you to shoot for too. I mean, it's not if you can dream it, Sai, you can do it.
I don't know. JD, I'm not convinced of that anymore because I have dreamed some stuff and I couldn't do it. So I'm not convinced of that. I know that's the American dream, but I am no longer convinced. Our number is 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. If you have a question about the church and the news, this is your hour. J.D. Flynn here with us, maybe once a month or even less than that. So we don't get them all the time. If you want to ask what's going on, this is the place to call, 888-318-7884. I read The Pillar, JD, at pillarcatholic.com, and I note that the Vatican is building a bigger courtroom. Is this supposed to make some miscreants nervous? Is this a signal? Like we ain't playing around anymore?
Well, we'll find out. So there is I think probably. I think probably there are some people who are a little bit nervous about that. The courtroom that is being built is a courtroom for the criminal trial, the criminal tribunal of the Vatican City State. So you've got a lot of courts over there at the Vatican. You've got the Apostolic Signatura and the Roman Rota, and the Apostolic Penitentiary has a little judicial process. So you have a lot of sort of Vatican courts, but the one that's building a new courtroom is the criminal court for the Vatican City State. This is like not if you're accused of committing a canon law crime, but just a straight up crime, an ordinary civil crime inside the Vatican City State, which is, as you know, an ordinary functioning country.
Right.
Even while it's not as large as other countries, any other countries, in fact, being the smallest sovereign entity in the world, is an ordinary functioning country with criminal law just like any other, and is anticipating some big trials coming up, some big criminal trials coming up. So you probably know that there is a sprawling investigation into the administration of money, the financial administration of the Vatican Secretariat of State, that there's a lot of questions about seemingly shady investments, and that some people have been charged already with embezzlement and money laundering and a whole host of other such things. And it's kind of in anticipation of that, it seems, that the Vatican City State's judiciary section has begun building a new courtroom, a bigger courtroom, because they're expecting a big crowd for the possibility of some of these trials. So it's just one of those things where it's like you don't think about the fact that there are these very practical things that have to be done in the administration of justice anywhere, and especially in the life of the church. But that's the way it goes. They had to get some room.
But Pope Francis is not playing around about getting the Vatican cleaned up. I mean, it's not an easy job. I'm not saying he's going to get it done in 5 minutes, but he's showing signs of being quite serious.
Yeah, Pope Francis has been very, very diligent about addressing issues of financial reform in the Vatican. And he said at the very beginning of his papacy that he was serious about that. And you probably remember that back in 2014, he appointed Cardinal George Pell as kind of like the finance czar of the Vatican. And Cardinal Pell's job was to essentially modernize a very sort of old-fashioned system of financial administration, the kind of system of financial administration that leaves itself open to all kinds of misconduct by bad actors, or even just kind of to the kind of negligence that can cost you a lot of money because it doesn't have sort of checks and balances built in, spending thresholds, audits, these kinds of things. So since the beginning of his papacy, Pope Francis has said that he wants very, very seriously to modernize the sort of financial operations of the Vatican. And part of that is cleaning up corruption. Just the sort of, mucking out the stables is not a pleasant thing. And there are some embedded kind of, it seems clear that now that there's some embedded ways of doing things that leave room for corruption, and that the Vatican Prosecutor's Office is now investigating some very serious charges of corruption. And the Pope has been changing laws kind of in the past few months. The Pope has been changing laws of criminal procedure with some frequency to kind of set up the Vatican City State's criminal tribunal to better try financial crimes. And so he's been making a lot of little changes to law that cumulatively add up to a pretty big deal.
Our number 888-318-7884. Your question doesn't have to be about the Vatican, but if you've got a question about the church in the news, you are welcome to call 888-318-7884. So the headlines still continue to be discouraging on the financial side, though, and you just wonder about some of this. There's a gentleman arrested, Torzi, I believe is his last name, in London recently on charges having to do with the mismanagement of Vatican funds. There's some question about, is the Vatican invested in a company that makes the morning after pill? Can you give us kind of the summation of what all this is about?
Yeah, and I challenge the idea that the headlines are discouraging, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
That arrest that you mentioned, this businessman named Gianluigi Torzi was arrested in London, and Gianluigi Torzi is kind of this fellow who's in the middle of this sort of sprawling Vatican financial scandal. He's a broker who the Holy See says has committed tax evasion, fraud, money laundering, and extortion, and has been kind of chasing after him for quite some time. Well. I think it's good news that he was arrested in London, and I think it's good news that we know that the Vatican is chasing these things. I think it's good news that he might face a trial, because I don't think, Cy, that kind of financial crime or financial misconduct is anything new. I think the new news, the story, is that the way it's being handled is changing so dramatically that you would see an arrest. That's a serious sign of reform. That's a sign of administration, a jurisdictional administration that takes seriously addressing these crimes. So I look at something like that as a serious sign of reform. I look at the thing that you just mentioned, that there have been this question about very seriously unethical investments, the possibility of very serious unethical investments at the Vatican City State. And this was alleged by someone who had previously been in an auditor position inside the Apostolic See. Well, he alleged that the Holy See had in its portfolio some pharmaceutical companies that manufactured the morning after pill. And he also said, though, and here's the good news, that as soon as he reported it to his bosses, the Holy See sold the stock. So someone had bought the stock, and that in itself is problematic. But as soon as they knew about it, the Holy See sold the stock. And here's the other piece of good news. Right after that, the Pope introduced new policies that seem very basic to us. I think probably many dioceses in this country have it, but for Rome, we're a big step forward. The Pope introduced a requirement for a sort of ethical investment policy, where things that the Holy See might invest in would have to be scrutinized for the degree to which they uphold the gospel of life, the degree to which they uphold the rights of workers, the degree to which they recognize human rights. And that's a big step forward for the Holy See. So again, I see these things coming to light as not only the possibility of reform, but we see these sort of changes that point to reform happening in real time. I'm excited about that.
Oh, I really appreciate that take, JD. 888-318-7884, our number. You're welcome to call if you have questions about the church and the news. When we come back, I do have to take a quick break, JD. I just want to ask you about what everybody seems to be talking about, the U.S. bishops and their struggles to come to some conclusion about what to do about Catholic politicians in public life who are openly advocating for a broad abortion license. So I'll ask you about that when we come back. And you're welcome to call JD with your questions, 888-318-7884. The 20 Answers Summer Reading Challenge continues. You can get all 44 books in the Catholic Answers 20 Answers collection, books, 20 answers on Jesus, on baptism, on the sacraments, the other sacraments, on everything from Mormonism to Jehovah's Witnesses to the Bible, the whole gamut. You get a great education in Catholic apologetics in these 44 books. You can get all 44 books when you buy them in a set at 70% off. 70% off right now at shop.catholic.com.
Catholic Answers Live.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
EWTN podcasts are the perfect companion for busy Catholics everywhere. Your favorite EWTN programs are waiting for you to listen to on your time. With on-demand access to audio, you can pause and pick up right where you left off, anytime, anywhere. Just subscribe by using your mobile device's free podcast app. Find old favorites or discover something new. EWTN podcasts. They're waiting for you.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. J.D. Flynn, Ed Condon are the founders of The Pillar, a wonderful, relatively new resource for Catholic news. You can find it at pillarcatholic.com. J.D. Flynn is our guest this hour, taking your questions on the church in the news. He claimed earlier that he's an admiral in the Navy of the state of Nebraska. I am skeptical, but very pleased that you've made that rank.
I did, and in fact, I just got a text from a great friend in Nebraska, my friend Mike Foley, who mentioned I think he's probably a Nebraska admiral too. So thanks for reaching out, sir. It's a fine fellowship to be in the great Navy of the state of Nebraska.
Well, that's I personally coined the phrase the Navy of the Prairie. So I feel like I should get.
I think you should trademark that right now and start selling us T-shirts.
I think I could sell one to you. And I'm not even sure you would buy it.
Oh, if you make it, I'll take it today.
All right. It's $1,000. Our number is 888-318-7884. J.D. Flynn, our guest, and I am going to go to the call. So callers, hang on. I'm going to get to you, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask about this. You maybe know this, J.D., but a couple weeks ago, Archbishop Cordileone from San Francisco came on our air to announce this new pastoral initiative he has to educate people about the Eucharist, to remind people about receiving the Eucharist in a state of grace, and to discuss the situation of politicians who openly and repeatedly advocate for a broad abortion license, but also present themselves for communion. This, it seems to me, the Archbishop said, and I'm sure that this is true, this is part of a long meditation of his own about how to address this in his archdiocese, but it also seems to me that it's part of a larger thing that's leading towards June when the bishops will meet, and then they'll meet again in November. Can you just tell us what the situation is in the United States when it comes to bishops, communion, and public officials who advocate abortion?
Well, yeah, it's a great question, and I think it has been on everybody's mind, especially leading up to the June meeting of the U.S. Bishops' Conference. There at that meeting, the bishops have been expected to vote on the possibility of a statement on this question of Eucharistic coherence, the question of pro-choice politicians receiving Holy Communion. And I think they're still expected to vote on the possibility of that statement. Now, that doesn't mean that they're voting on the text, just that they're voting on, it's kind of, you got to love Episcopal parliamentary procedure. They're voting on the prospect of drafting the text, and then subsequently at another meeting they'll vote on the text itself. So,
do they have to vote on whether they can vote first? I mean, we're
at the very least, we're going to need a motion and a second before they can vote on whether they're going to vote, for sure, to be sure. So they're starting this process, this discussion, and I think a lot of bishops have said they think that's a good thing. and bishops have weighed in different ways, with pastoral letters, with statements. A few bishops now have taken to the pages of magazines like America Magazine to sort of weigh in with their view on things. And you can see shaping up a number of bishops who are saying, we think it's important that Catholics who advocate for positions that are contrary to the gospel of life, that are contrary to the dignity of life, not just abortion, but other positions that are contrary to the dignity of life, should not approach Holy Communion. And we recognize that the Church's canon law, the law of the Church, says that pro-choice politicians can be prohibited from receiving Holy Communion. Now, there are other bishops who have since weighed in and said, well, that's kind of a weaponization of the Eucharist, or that kind of makes too political the Eucharist. And then this first group of bishops says, well, this is, this goes back to St. Paul saying, that if we eat and drink the body and blood of Christ unworthily, we eat and drink our own condemnation. The thing has gotten a little bit more attention lately because Cardinal Ladaria, who is the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith in Rome, sent a letter last week to the U.S. bishops, and that letter urged them to it didn't say they shouldn't do this, and it said that they should kind of rely on the Church's teaching on this, the Church's law and teaching, which makes clear that a person who's not who's advocating for things that are contrary to the teaching of the Church should not approach Holy Communion. But it did urge the bishops to what he called pious and serene reflection, and to try to reach unanimity on this. And this has kind of been a frequent refrain of the Holy See lately, like urging the bishops not to move away from the doctrine of the Church. I don't think Cardinal Ladaria's letter was saying that at all, although some people have interpreted it that way, but rather to pray more before they speak. And I don't think anybody who is a believer in the gospel of Jesus Christ thinks that the notion of praying more before they speak is a bad idea. So Ladaria's letter has been I've sort of said it's kind of like an ink blot. People are interpreting it in lots and lots of different ways. But if you read the actual text of the letter, which we published at the Pillar, you'll see that he's urging the bishops to lean more deeply into the teachings of the Church and to pray more and to try to reach unity before they speak on these things. I'm not sure that's not good advice, altogether.
J.D. Flynn, our guest, our number 888-318-7884. If you have questions about the Church and the news, I have a whole bunch more that I've got listed here for J.D., but I do want to let callers get their questions in. So I'm going to go to line 3. Okay, line 3, Mark in Prairie Province in Canada, listening on AveMariaRadio.net. Mark, glad to have you. Go ahead with your question for J.D. Flynn.
Yeah, I appreciate your Prairie Navy. That's near and dear to my heart. I love the ocean. It's great.
Well, consider enlisting.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know if Canada has a similar thing. We should kind of form an alliance quickly.
Well, yeah, I think we should. Yeah, we should probably piggyback off of that. So, anyways, my question has to do with like news and Facebook in particular. And my question is, why do Catholics continue to use and more insidiously promote Facebook to connect people and to show content and in particular pictures and videos? So why do Catholics continue to use that? And I can cite examples of for example, when you were indicating that you have images of your new studio, well, it's going to be on Facebook. Well, poor schleps like me don't have Facebook, so I guess we're yeah, so it's person of goodwill, and also even my church, continue to promote the use of Facebook by having video masses on there, and this is basically just fueling a multi-billion-dollar corporation that is just feeding off of people's personal and private information.
Okay, Mark, I'm going to let JD take a shot at that. It's a powerful objection.
It's a great question. It's an interesting question. They always say if you don't know what the product is, you're the product. And that could certainly be said about Facebook, which, as you say, basically is in the business of learning as much as it possibly can about us and then selling ads and monetizing that information in any number of ways. So you're not wrong about that at all, Mark. I think that's a fair point. I was thinking a little bit about, and I'm not a scripture scholar by any stretch of the imagination, but I was just thinking a little bit about St. Paul at the Areopagus, right? I mean, going to a place that was a kind of a mix of of conversations of a variety of kinds, and even going to a place where there was a great deal of pagan worship, and going there in a very deliberative way to preach Christ crucified. And I wonder, in many ways, social media is becoming the contemporary public square for a lot of people, and it's not a public square that is pure or clean or holy or good in many, many ways, I think, some of which you're identifying. Now, of course, there's the potential in social media to be in touch with people who are not often in touch with, and to have, maybe more regular contact with family members and things like that. But there are limitations to those things. And I think we also have to be aware, as you probably point out, of even kind of the neurological impact of social media and the kind of conditioning that comes along with sort of like the self-branding and fishing for likes and things like that come with social media. So you're not wrong about any of that. I think that's right. I do think there's a value of being in a place where people are, and a place where people rather sorely need the gospel, which is everywhere, right? I mean, people everywhere need the gospel, and social media is one of those places where we have the ability, I hope, to find ways to give some proclamation of the gospel. But the church has this thing every year called World Communications Day, and they give a little message about kind of the state of communications in the world. And a few of them a few years back were on social media, and I recall, I think it was in the pontificate of Benedict XVI, and so social media was still developing, but not nearly as ubiquitous as it is now. And I recall the Holy Father saying that the online encounter can be a good thing, and online relationships can be a good thing, but they themselves should not be viewed as sort of being complete, that they should call us into the kind of personal encounter which is truly and uniquely human. And certainly we can see that with like what's happened with the Mass over the last year. People have the idea that kind of watching Mass online or on TV is the same as being at Mass. Well, it's not. I mean, it's not in any sense, theologically, spiritually, humanly, personally. It's a good devotion, perhaps, but it's not in any way sort of the spiritual sense of assisting at Holy Mass. And so the point that the Holy Father made, and again, I think I can't quite remember when that was, but the point that the Holy Father made was that these online relationships and this online proclamation of the gospel should be ordered towards calling people into human and authentic relationships with each other, including relationships of prayer and the relationship with our Lord in a more a human way, and most especially in a more sacramental way. Yeah, I mean, I think there's some value to being in these places where people are, and I think there's some scriptural, forerunners to that. And at the same time, always to call us into something deeper and something more real, and living in reality is living in Christ and living in the sacraments. And so I do think you're right that it should be a call out instead of just sort of an acceptance of, if that makes sense.
Mark, thanks very much for the call. I hope that was helpful and satisfying to you. I don't know how much you get this in your end of the business, JD, but we here at Catholic Answers, I ask the marketing people every now and then, how does Facebook treat you? And they're not treated well by Facebook. Posts that we want to make are, held up because somebody has to review them. And this is basic Catholic stuff. We're not doing, some kind of radical new vision of the world. But it's true that the social media companies, I think, have a modern secular view. And many of them are, I think, engineers, and they don't have a wholesome education in humanities, and they come across Catholic ideas and they think that they're utterly foreign and that they have to somehow protect the world from what we're saying.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's right. And we at the Pillar, maybe I guess we're too little to be on anybody's radar, maybe, but I certainly have had that experience in other apostolates, and I know other Catholic apostolates have too, where it's clear that some of the proclamation of the gospel seems foreign, or even is seen to be an offense on social media, and this is a real and serious problem. But it's also evidence of the profound differences between the technocratic worldview and the Christian worldview, and if that's true, I don't think it's enough for us just to say, well, the technocracy into which we're headed is a sure path to hell, and so to hell with it. I don't think that's sufficient. Instead, I think we have to say, well, if this is true, all the more reason for us to plunge in there with the redemptive, with the redemptive message of the gospel.
Amen, brother. All right, let's go to John in McKinney, Texas, listening on the new and improved Catholic Answers Live app. John, go ahead with your question for J.D. Flynn.
Just have a short question. It's we were talking about the expansion of the court at the Vatican recently, and I wonder, does the Vatican have a prison?
Oh, it's a good question. The Vatican City State has holding cells. If you are, I don't know what. Well, if you were acting in a seriously disorderly way inside, let's say, a mass, if you were invited to an audience inside, like, let's say, Politics Hall, and then you were acting in a very seriously disorderly way and you were taken away by the Swiss guards, this is becoming a weird situation now, but it could happen, I suppose. Not to you. You seem like a nice guy. But if you were acting disorderly in Politics Hall and taken away by the Swiss guards, you would be put into a Vatican City State holding cell. And if you were maybe intoxicated inside Vatican City State, you might be in that holding cell long enough to sort of dry out, as it were. But if you were going to serve any serious time, and if you were going to be held for a couple of days, actually you'd be held inside one of the residences in Vatican City State with a guard outside the door. But if you're going to do any serious time for a Vatican City State crime, you do it in an Italian prison. The Vatican City State and Italy have a concordat, a treaty that covers a lot of different aspects of sort of the relationship. And one of those things is the prison exchange agreement.
So it's not a, Las Vegas, they take you out in the desert situation, John, but yeah, you can do time in an Italian prison. So in case you were planning any Vatican crimes there, John, now you have your answer. J.D. Flynn's here with us. It's Church in the News this hour. If you got questions about the Church in the News, 888-318-7884.
We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
According to divine command, we should give God worship, but how do we know if we're doing it right? Is worship a form of self-help? To make me feel better? A form of social activism, or even a commodity? Or is it something that transcends all of those? In Real Religion, How to Avoid False Faith and Worship God in Spirit and Truth, Father Jeff Kirby cuts through the misguided modern notions about God and religion and takes you back to the foundation for true worship, God's revelation about himself. From his first contact with his chosen people to the culmination of his revelation in Jesus Christ, God shows us what religion is supposed to be like and how to make the practice of it a lifelong virtue in our lives. Order your copy of Real Religion by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. J.D. Flynn, our guest. I had like a million questions I was going to ask him, and now I can't get to any of them because there's so many callers want to ask questions, but that is all right. We'll just keep having J.D. on. J.D. is the editor-in-chief and co-founder of The Pillar. You can find it at pillarcatholic.com, a wonderful, just now flowering website for finding Catholic news from all around the world, and J.D. knows everybody in every Catholic church around the world. As a matter of fact,
This is not.
Is that not true? Am I exaggerating?
I know. I mean,
I'm exaggerating your
I'm close.
Okay. All right. So St. Peter's Parish in Mwanza, Tanzania. Can you name the pastor there?
Oh gosh, he used to be a buddy of mine, but he got transferred, so I don't know.
He used to be a buddy of mine. I don't know. I've lost faith in you, JD. All right. Let's have more caller questions. That's all right.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, Chris in Chesapeake, Virginia, watching on Facebook Live. Now I feel bad about the whole Facebook thing. We're there.
Areopagus, man.
All right. Okay. Right. Chris, go ahead with your question for JD.
Well, first off, don't feel bad because that's how I found you guys. It's great. So I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Chris.
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking my call. So I wish I had a little bit more of a specific question regarding church in the news, but this is an underlying question which might touch, I guess, maybe a couple or a few. So, as you know, the Pope's statements always seem to be mistakenly confused by a lot of people as being stated infallibly. And so, like, looking into this, I've found that church teaching is broken down into doctrine, dogma, and discipline. So within this context, I'm wondering as to, like, what is the proper way to understand things like the Pope's statements and Catholic social teaching, even things like who can receive the Eucharist, and like what is the ultimate hook of authority upon which to hang our hats as Catholics? Because, this is my last thing I'll say, as a Catholic, I've got a lot of non-Catholic friends who love Jesus a lot, but what's unshakable to me is that I know that 2,000 years the Church has been through so much corruption, but has made it through with the teaching remaining pure. So just to bring it back a little bit of clarity, I've heard it, the church teaching being broken down into doctrine, dogma, and discipline. And so I'm wondering what lens or understanding is the proper way to view things like the Pope's statements, Catholic social teaching, and other things of that nature.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. It's a broad question, Chris, and therefore I'm afraid I suppose I have to give you a broad answer, which is, would that I would be able to kind of treat each one of those things, but that would probably be a dissertation instead of a radio show. But it's true that the Pope speaks in a variety of ways, right? And it's not true just to Pope Francis, but it's true of the whoever it is that's occupying the chair of St. Peter. It is true that the Pope speaks in a variety of different ways. There are times when the Pope is speaking by definition, by intention, in an authoritative and infallible way to declare and clarify some dogmatic truth, which is to be believed by Catholics. There are times when the Pope is teaching in an authoritative way that binds us to give a belief. There are times when the Pope is teaching in an authoritative way which binds us to give our assent to hold something, not necessarily to believe it, but to hold it to be true. And then there are times when the Pope teaches in ways that impact the life of the Church, and so it's authoritative not in a sense of sort of teaching ministry, but in terms of the Pope's governing ministry, which doesn't bind us to believe. It's perfectly legitimate if the Pope makes a law for us to say, "Oh, I think that's a bad law. I don't like that law." I'd nevertheless be obliged to. I don't even, nevertheless be obliged to believe it to act upon it because it is indeed an aspect of the Pope's governing ministry. At the same time, the Pope also teaches when he's sort of preaching or teaching, writing letters or making statements in audiences and those things. Those are something that's called part of the Pope's ordinary magisterium. And that's something that requires of us what the Church says a religious submission of our intellect and will. And that doesn't mean that we have to hold what the Pope says or we have to believe what the Pope says in those contexts, but that we have to sort of be deferential to the Pope's teaching in those ways as a father, as a pastor. That we have to be kind of be willing to consider in a serious way in our mind and in our hearts what it is that the Pope is saying, even when he's speaking sort of just as the Bishop of Rome, not just, but in this ordinary way. And then there are times when the Pope is clearly speaking in a way in which he doesn't intend to exercise any official capacity at all. When he gives an interview to a newspaper reporter, when he makes the Pope I've seen lately has been making videos, to post on Facebook. Sorry again to that first guy, but videos again to post on Facebook about various things that are not intended, to be an authoritative act of his magisterium, extraordinary or ordinary, and so those things, and those are often the times when the Pope's at a press conference on an airplane, for example. Those are often the times when the Pope is sort of most frequently seen to be causing confusion with his words, or when people seem to be most frequently confused or scandalized or something like that, when the Pope is sort of speaking off the cuff. And the good thing about those is that we can recognize that the Pope is a man who occupies an office, and that office is protected in particular ways by the Holy Spirit at particular times. But that doesn't mean that every word that comes out of the Pope's mouth is infallible or protected by the Holy Spirit, or is even intended to be, or the Pope even intends it to be. And so we can sort of make a differentiation between Pope Francis the man and Pope Francis in various kinds of official exercises of his office.
Chris,
I hope that helps a little.
And if you'll hang on the line, I'd like to send you a copy of Jimmy Akin's book, Teaching with Authority, in which Jimmy breaks it all down for you in a very helpful way. And you can review it there whenever you'd like. If you would like that book, hang on the line, and we'll send it to you. Teaching with Authority, Jimmy Akin's book on how to understand the different levels of authoritative teaching in the Catholic Church. Our number is 888-318-7884. Our guest is J.D. Flynn from PillarCatholic.com. That's The Pillar, and they write about Catholic news. So if you've got a question about the church and the news, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. Going to South Alabama now, listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio is David in South Alabama. David, go ahead with your question for J.D.
Thank you for taking my call. And Mr. Flynn, I want to thank you for the website you put together. The Pillar website is extremely informative.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Hey, thanks.
Your website was the only place I was able to find the actual copy of the Cardinal Laudaria's letter to Archbishop Gomez regarding the Eucharist. And in reading it, my recollection was as a reference to a letter that Cardinal Ratzinger, I guess Pope Emeritus now, but Cardinal Ratzinger wrote to Archbishop McCarrick, or I guess he's no longer a priest, but and it appears to have given him specific guidance, McCarrick specific guidance as to, the who should be able to receive communion in the context of a politician who was affirmatively advocating abortion. And so I'm curious whether that letter that Cardinal Ratzinger sent to Mayor Carrick we would be able to take a look at that on your website.
Well, David, that's a great question. Thank you. I haven't published it on my website, and I'll tell you why. I don't have it. I have seen the first person who I'm aware who published what I think to be the whole of that memo is the great Vaticanist Sandro Magister, who is who writes for an Italian publication called Chiesa. My Italian is crappy. Anyway, he writes for this Chiesa, and Sandro Magister published back in 2004 in English, in fact, the Ratzinger letter to Cardinal McCarrick, which really takes the form of a memo. There's no sort of salutation or closing or anything like that. Just I think I want to say 6 points and a sort of proviso at the end, really. And so Magister published it, and I think a few people have published it subsequently. But I've always wanted, I'll tell you the truth, I've always wanted to see it on letterhead. And the reason for that is because I believe that these points are the whole of the thing. But there's this curious part of the Laudaria letter, maybe you picked up on it too, where Laudaria says, he says, wanting to honor Cardinal Ratzinger's inclination to not publish to not publish his letter to McCarrick, and he seems to be quoting from Ratzinger in some way where he says that the letter was not to be published. But I've never seen that quote from Cardinal Laudaria, so I don't know if that's in the original version of the letter or not. I've always been curious about that, and it's a real curiosity, and that's part of the reason I think why I've probably never published the full text. But that letter, certainly Laudaria references and says, that letter from Ratzinger to McCarrick, which is intended to give guidance on the principles related to the admission of pro-choice politicians to Holy Communion, should guide the bishops. Laudaria is clear about that. He says you should read it in light of other guidance that's come from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and you should take it under advisement under those auspices. But he doesn't say they shouldn't use it. In fact, on the contrary, he says they should take it under consideration. So it is, I think, an important piece of guidance from Cardinal Ratzinger, who became Benedict XVI. And in my own sort of thought as a canon lawyer and as a journalist, it seems consistent with what the CDF said just before that in 2002, and what the Church said in 1983 in the promulgation of the Code of Canon Law, and in what the bishops of Latin America said in their Aparecida document, and in so many other places where this topic has been taken up. That McCarrick letter seems to be kind of consistent, the Ratzinger letter seems to be kind of consistent with what the Church has said at the universal level and at local levels too. So I hope that it is. I hope that the bishops do sort of take it under advisement, because that seems to be what Cardinal Laudaria is calling for here.
Excuse me, that was David in South Alabama. I'm very glad you called and asked that question, because I didn't realize that, JD, that these were private communications, or maybe not private, but professional anyways, communications between the Vatican and bishops, and that they're not just, you can't just go to the Vatican website and see what Cardinal Ratzinger wrote before he was Pope Benedict.
Yeah. In fact, arguably, I'd say Cardinal Laudari is probably not too pleased that we published his letter to Archbishop Gomez of last week. We certainly didn't ask anybody's permission before we put it on the internet. The thing about 2004 is people were just less likely to be putting things on the internet, as it were, right? So we don't have it with letterhead or something like that. But that was a piece of private communication. And what was supposed to happen is that McCarrick got it from Ratzinger because McCarrick had written to Ratzinger saying, give us some guidance on this. And it's widely understood that McCarrick was supposed to then explain that guidance and share that letter with the U.S. bishops, which he didn't do. He gave them a very brief summary of it, and then they sort of moved on and said, well, the diocesan bishops will handle this. So there has always been sort of question about why that wasn't more widely promulgated, and Laudari himself kind of hints at that, which has been, just as a matter of curiosity, something I myself would like to sort of be able to unravel a little bit better.
David, thank you. We have to take a break. There are more folks on the line for J.D. Flynn. We're talking about the church and the news. Just questions for J.D. about the news that the church is involved in around the world. I'm not going to let this hour end without asking you again about the German bishops. So I'm going to get to as many callers as I can, but there is at least one German bishop question coming for you. And before I send you off to the break, most of what you've heard about the Crusades and the Inquisition, it's probably not true. There's a whole lot of myth and biased information about the Crusades and the Inquisitions. That's why we've got a free ebook for you this month, The Real Story of the Crusades and the Inquisition. Get your copy today at shop.catholic.com. Just look for the button at the top of the page, shop.catholic.com.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
He is honored by the Church as a saint with the title of the Angelic Doctor.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Thomas Aquinas wrote a basic textbook for young theology students that became the Church's most famous guide to the faith, the Summa Theologica. It helped him earn the title Doctor of the Church. He died in 1274.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. We really could do this for 2 hours because it's fascinating always to hear a bit of an insider's take on the church in the news. Hardworking journalist J.D. Flynn, the founder and the editor-in-chief of The Pillar. You can find it at pillarcatholic.com. Pillar Catholic. And you've already heard some of our callers endorsing the work they do over there.
That's great.
Yeah, lots of folks on the line for you, Admiral. So I'm just going to keep going back to the phones. Denver, Colorado. John in Denver, Colorado, listening on 1060 AM. You are up next. Go ahead, John, with your question for J.D. Flynn.
Hi, Mr. Flynn. This is in the news. You hear whether these pro-abortion politicians should go to communion and everything, and I think we're giving our questions or answers or arguments at a natural level, you know. And I'm with Father Altman, who says the Democratic platform all the way down is to promote mortal sin. And I'm saying, we can't dump more sins on Christ crucified. We're dealing with God and His mercy and judgment. So I'm not sure when mercy will end. I think we're in mercy time right now. And I don't know when judgment time will come along, but we can't dump 60 million aborted babies while He's on a cross. That is horrendous for me to think about that. And we just don't care about God, and we're talking about code canon 915 this year. Let's discuss this here. Let's talk about God's judgment. What do you think? Am I
Well, John, thank you for asking, and I'm from Denver too, so good to talk to a neighbor, I suppose. Thank you for asking. John, I think this is a question that a lot of people have been asking lately, and a lot of people have been talking about lately. And first of all, please let me say that the scourge, the shame, the evil, the horror of abortion is our country's national shame, and I think that we all will be asked at our own judgment what we did to end abortion, to be sure, and without any question. Legal protection for abortion is a grave evil. I mean, there's no doubt about that. There's no way around that, and no one should deny that, or can, I think, reasonably deny that. The questions of how we vote are the church says. I mean, at the end of the day, the church herself teaches that the questions about how we vote are not as always clear-cut as that, because there are questions about sort of making proportional judgments at different times, and the church has said it's not our job to teach people, to tell people who to vote for, rather to teach them how to vote. And Catholics have to make judgments about whether or not there is a proportionate, there are proportionate reasons to vote for particular people in particular races, and that has to do with a lot of things. I think if you lived in, let's say, New York City, Cardinal Dulles used to say this. If he lived in New York City, he said if he didn't vote for a Democrat in the city council election, there'd be nobody for him to vote for because everybody running was a Democrat, and so he had to choose between these options, none of whom were good, but all of whom were the ones that were available to him. And there are different ways in which that's true in different kind of elections too. The church says we can never vote for someone because of their stance in favor of legal protection for abortion, and that if we're going to vote against that stance for legal protection if we're going to vote for someone who has a stance for legal protection for abortion, we need to have a proportionate reason for it. I can only speak for myself, John. I can say that I've not found in a national election, a federal election, a proportionate reason to vote for someone who supports legal protection for abortion that is equivalent to the national scourge and shame and evil of abortion. For myself, I can say that the church says that that's something that each Catholic has to make a judgment about, and she provides guidance about that. And I can say for myself, in a federal election, I have not found anything that contributes to that. But I think we do have to judge each election sort of on its own merits, because when I make a judgment about sort of city council here in Jefferson County, those are not, there are a different set of issues at play. The city council members have different levels of authority on different things. And then again, I have to sort of say, what is their authority on the things that are in their purview? And that's what the church says. We have to make sort of different deliberations at the question of each election. I know that a lot of people don't like that answer because it seems like a squishy answer, or it means you're not pro-life or something like that. I get it. But I think the truth is the church says some things are complex, and we have to weigh that complexity, and we have to form our own consciences to weigh that complexity. And again, for myself, I have never seen it reasonable or possible to find a proportionate reason to vote for someone who supports legal protection for abortion in a congressional race or a senatorial race or for president or something like that. But who that means is left, and how we make choices about who we vote for after that, or whether we vote, or how we vote in other elections, all of those things require honest discernments and conscience. And that's I don't think that's a squishy answer. I just think it means the Christian life in a modern democracy is an incredibly difficult prospect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think when we spoke with Archbishop Cordileone a couple of weeks ago about his work in the Archdiocese of San Francisco with his new pastoral letter, he was making a point similar to what John made in that he was saying, we do need to talk about mortal sin, and we have to get people to understand what the Eucharist is again, and why you don't receive the Eucharist in a state of mortal sin. And I do think the bishops have their work cut out for them there. I mean, many Catholics don't believe in the real presence of Christ, so they don't believe the fundamental teaching of the Church on the Eucharist, and they don't really believe in sin anymore. So they don't. It's all kind of a free-for-all if you have that mentality. And the bishops do have a lot of work to do there.
And sometimes I think we sort of even stop there. We say, well, don't receive the Eucharist in a state of mortal sin, when the real message of the Lord is stop sinning and grace can help you. You can be better than sin, right? It's not sort of be mired in your sinfulness and don't receive the Eucharist, but you can do it by virtue of the cross and resurrection. And I think that's the message. But man, these voting questions can become so, the church tells us we have to make judgments about these things, and that's hard, and they can become so divisive as a consequence of that. That's not an easy thing.
Back in the 1930s, Eugenio Pacelli, who became Pope Pius XII, negotiated an agreement with Adolf Hitler called the Reichskonkordat. And why is the Reichskonkordat still important today?
Well, the Reichskonkordat, which was indeed negotiated between the Holy See and the Germany when it was under Nazi rule, is still the operative treaty between the nation of Germany and the Holy See, and it delineates a lot of things, including kind of the way in which the Catholic Church is recognized in civil law in Germany. It's interesting right now because there's been a lot of talk about the German bishops and the possibility of schism, and a bishop who is in schism loses the right to exercise his office as bishop anymore. And I've wondered what would happen if the church said a bishop was in schism. Would he still be recognized by German civil authorities as kind of being the bishop and, kind of heading the diocese as a civil corporation? Would he still be able to administer the tax money that German Catholic churches get? German Catholic churches are funded by kind of an income tax that the government collects and passes on to them, and it's worth billions of dollars. Well, it turns out that the Reichskonkordat actually spells out that the German government recognizes as the legitimate bishop of a diocese the person who the church says is in charge of the diocese. So the German government doesn't see any difference between sort of this recognizing the church in civil law and the church's understanding of herself in canon law, which is not true for us in the United States. You live in San Diego. The Bishop of San Diego is both canonically the Bishop of San Diego, and he also heads some civil corporation called the Bishop of San Diego, a California nonprofit corporation, or however it's organized. And so he has these two jobs. And if he lost the job of Bishop of San Diego, he'd have to formally resign that other job. It's not as if the state of California is going to ask the Pope who's in charge of that nonprofit corporation. But in Germany, it's different. And the reason for that is this Concordat, which kind of has a very odd historical curiosity, was established in a very controversial way in the 1930s between the Holy See and the Third Reich, and subsequently, the church condemned Nazism, but many people said they never should have signed that Concordat, and that the German government wasn't negotiating in good faith, and it was a hugely historical, controversial moment. At the same time, the treaty is still in force, which is sort of fascinating, it seems to me at least, and could impact the question of what would happen if a German bishop were found to be in schism.
I think the church was wise to negotiate it and sign it. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, Adolf Hitler used treaties to buy time for when he would attack you the next time. That's what he did to everybody. Certainly what he did to the Russians and the Poles and the Czechs and the but I mean the wisdom of it is shown today in that you had to make a deal with Mussolini because Mussolini was the head of Italy. You had to make a deal with Hitler because Hitler was the head of Germany. There wasn't somebody else to make a deal with, and they made deals that were better than having no deal at all.
It's a very interesting question, and that's the argument. The argument that you're making is the argument that the Vatican Secretary of State is making about its deal right now with Beijing. Yeah. And there are people who say, yeah, but you don't negotiate with Beijing because Beijing doesn't regard its negotiation in good faith, and Christians are still being persecuted, and Beijing won't actually do the things it said it was supposed to do. And then there are people who say, yeah, but you have to do what you can to protect the rights of the church.
You do.
And there's no perfect situation. So it's a really interesting question, I think, for sure.
If popes twice negotiated with Attila the Hun, I think that sets a precedence. You have to negotiate who's got the sword because we don't have a sword.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We don't have a sword, and if we did, we'd be beating into a plowshare or something. So lots of luck that's going to do for us.
J.D. Flynn is not only the founder but also the editor-in-chief at The Pillar. You can find it at pillarcatholic.com, pillarcatholic.com. And I recommend that you do so. I'm just going to share a question with you because there's not enough time to get more people on the phone, but this is coming from Pat in Canada, listening on Alexa. Why is Mr. McCarrick not in jail for the abuse of his crimes?
Got to ask the prosecutor of the state of New York. It seems most likely, or New Jersey, it seems most likely it's because the crimes that he committed from the civil law extended past the statute of limitations, so he can't be tried for them. The church waived the statute of limitations. The church said, actually, yes, the canonical statute of limitations expired, but we're going to waive that and try him anyway because these things are so egregious and so critical to the integrity of the church. The criminal the criminal jurisdictions under which he committed these crimes have criminal statutes of limitations, and he hasn't been tried for that reason. It's up to the prosecutors of those places and the laws of those places.
In the United States, though,
it's not up to the prosecutors.
Yeah, you can't change a criminal because that would be an ex post facto, and that's against the United States Constitution.
So it's not up to the prosecutors, right? Yeah, it's up to the law. Yeah, exactly. There's nothing you can do. Yeah,
but in a civil proceeding they could, but not in a criminal proceeding.
Right. That's right.
So thanks, Pat, very much for the question. I'm sorry, there's so many people we didn't get you on with JD, but that just tells us we need to have him on more often. We come back and do this more with us, JD. Good.
Yeah, you bet.
We love having you, Admiral. Enjoy your sail. Are you going out sailing now, or
going out for a little patrol sail? You got it.
Okay, just patrol around The rolling
right.
hills of Nebraska. Good. I hope you enjoy that. Coming up next, Trent Horn's going to be here, and it's always great when we get to have conversations between Trent Horn and atheists. If you're an atheist person and you want to explain your atheism, if you want to have a conversation with folks we love conversation, but we don't hide the fact that we believe in God, we believe in the triune God, we believe that the second person of that Trinity, Jesus of Nazareth, is the Son of God. All that, we believe, we don't hide it, but we love talking about it. If you're an atheist, 888-318-7884. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. So happy to be with you here on a Monday. Thanks for being with us. Trent's here, Trent Horn, apologist, speaker extraordinaire, and author of a huge stack of books here at Catholic Answers and with other publishers as well. Among his books, Persuasive Pro-Life, Why We're Catholic, and Answering Atheism. And that's what we're going to do this hour, answer some atheism. I kind of pitched it to you as if you're an atheist call, but if you want to, if you're a believer yourself and you'd like some help answering atheist objections to belief in God, you're welcome to call as well. 888-318-7884. 888-318-7884. Hello, Trent Horn.
Hello, Mr. Cy Kellett. I like the new studio setup.
Do you? I like it too. I feel very fancy in here.
I know it. It has a very Pints with Aquinas feel to it.
It does.
It does. You're in the footsteps. I still have to. I want the same treatment here in my little remote office / closet.
Well, I don't know. Do you want someone to come into Texas and tidy up your closet for you? I mean, what are you asking?
Yes, I do. I want to have the little, soft red glowing lights, and I want 2 light bulbs hanging behind me.
There's
two.
There's a kind of lighting that they used to do in Hollywood. Oh, what's it called? Where they light the face from below, but there was these directors who could do it, and they could make you look just beautiful. It didn't matter how you looked; you just looked beautiful.
Below, isn't that what you do when you tell a campfire story? You hold the flashlight below you, and you look really gruesome.
But it had other aspects to it. I can't remember what the name. was.
Oh, sure.
But
my favorite.
I want that.
My favorite
lighting.
trick they did. Oh yeah, I want that, and I want a bunch of Vaseline put on the camera lens.
Yes,
I want to look like super soft and ethereal.
The guys here, they never understand. Why is there Vaseline on the lenses again? It's not me. Don't know how that happened. 888-318-7884. 888-318-7884. Our guest is Trent Horn. I am your host, Cy Kellett, coming to you from the brand new, beautiful studio here at Catholic Answers. And you are welcome to call whether you're atheist or not. Please, if you're an atheist person and that you would like to, well, first of all, if you'd like to yell at Trent, I always enjoy it when people call and yell at Trent. But if you'd like to argue the atheist position with us, you're very welcome here. 888-318-7884. But maybe you're just a person who would like to be able to answer a particular atheist objection, maybe something that's presented on the internet or in something that you read, or a friend or acquaintance challenges you with a good challenge on why you should not believe in God, and you'd like some help with it. 888-318-7884. That's all right. You'll talk to all those people, right, Trent?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about issues related to atheism, the existence of God, divine attributes. We'll have a blast. So whether you're Catholic or Christian, you have a question about atheism or the existence of God, or an argument for or against God, whoever you are, I'd love to chat about all of that. It'd be a lot of fun.
888-318-7884. I've never asked you this, Trent, but like in this idea of defending God, that which is part of what an apologist does. Who are your heroes in that regard? Who do you go, oh, that's a guy that really, or woman, man or woman, who like that person really helped me get a clear view of how you do this?
Oh, you mean like defending the existence of God and combating atheism?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, a long list of people. Obviously, you have the historical elements, people like St. Anselm, St. Thomas Aquinas. They weren't dealing with atheists per se, but they put forward important arguments that'd be necessary to do that. When it comes to modern defenders, if I had to throw out a few names, it's a mixture of Catholic and Protestant philosophers. I don't agree with everything that each of these philosophers espouses, but I've found them helpful. On the Catholic side, I've enjoyed Brian Davies, Edward Feser. I'm trying to think of others who I've read. David Oderberg would be another example. Alexander Pruss from Baylor University is a genius. I really enjoy his wide variety of writings. On the Protestant side, of course, I've really enjoyed the work of William Lane Craig, both in his writings and his debate formats. J.P. Moreland is very good. And I just try to take the best. Josh Rasmussen is a very good Protestant philosopher in this regard. I'm going to actually see Josh and other people at a conference in Houston in August, Cy. It's going to be a conference on defending Christianity. I am going to be the only Catholic speaker, actually. Everyone else is Protestant, but I was invited to present Aquinas and Divine Simplicity. So with the mostly Protestant audience, I think it'll be a hoot. I'm really excited.
I'm so glad that you're able to do that, because we have essentially the same task, don't we? I mean, whether it's Protestant or Catholics, when it comes to this, defending the existence of God, which often is associated with also defending the goodness of God. You have these ancillary things that you have to defend with the existence of God, the transcendence of God and whatnot. It's essentially the same task.
Right. I think that among Catholics and Protestants, we do believe in the core doctrine, belief in one God who is the uncreated creator of the universe. Though among Protestants, we also, among Protestants, we differ on important points, though. We differ on things like whether God is simple, he's not composed of parts, whether he's timeless or temporal. Some Protestants believe that God is not all-powerful, for example, or not all-knowing. So we disagree on even some important elements of God, but we're all pretty much united in defending monotheism, and so we can find common ground in that respect.
A call's already coming in for you, as is entirely expected when you're here. Trent, shall we go to the phones?
Shall we? Let us.
Let us go to the phones. Connor in Shreveport, Louisiana, listening on the new and improved Catholic Answers Live app. Connor, go ahead with your question for Trent Horn.
Hi. A month or so ago, Trent was in a debate with an atheist on Fights with Aquinas. I forgot his name.
Yes.
But I think it's like Alex something. But
Alex O'Connor.
He brought up animal suffering, and I was just wondering, how would you answer the question? How could it all good and loving God allow animal suffering outside the actions of humans?
Sure. So to answer this question, this is a subset of the problem of evil. The problem of evil says, how can God allow suffering or evil or suffering? Why would an all-good, all-powerful God allow suffering in general? And the standard answer is that, well, if God has good reasons for allowing suffering, then it can be justified. So we look at some suffering of human beings, and we would say, okay, excuse me, why would God let human beings suffer? Well, sometimes we suffer from moral evil because human beings have free will. And so it's the good of free will outweighs the badness of the suffering that's caused, and God can compensate humans in the afterlife for the suffering they endure in this life. So the problem of animal suffering comes up here when people will say, all right, those reasons make sense for human suffering, but what good reasons could there be for God to justify animal suffering? Now, I would say here first that the burden of proof is on the atheist to say there are no good, God could not possibly have any good reasons. It's his argument. And so if we can see there are good reasons that justify human suffering to show that God can be justified in doing this, he can bring more good from it. If those reasons exist, just because we can't think of reason, even if we couldn't think of any reasons to justify animal suffering, it wouldn't prove there are no good reasons, because we're very limited as human beings, and God is infinite in knowledge and power. So I would say we're not in a good position to say there are no such reasons. But number two, I would say that certain reasons do present themselves as being plausible. One reason could be that without the ability to feel pain, certain animals wouldn't really be animals. Like if a deer couldn't feel pain, how would it know to run away from danger? How would it know to protect itself? Unless God just controlled all of its actions, then it wouldn't. So there it'd be like, well, can God are they really, to say they're animals without pain, even though they don't feel anything, is like saying you can have humans who don't have free will and just do whatever God tells them. I think it'd be kind of a contradiction. There's other reasons people have proposed. There's a minority view that God could compensate certain animals in the afterlife if those animals have continuous experiences of things. So it's not popular in the Catholic sphere, especially among Thomists, but it has been offered by certain people. Some Franciscans have argued for it. Also, I would argue that the good of the animals existing themselves justifies suffering they may endure. And this was an example I gave in the debate with Alex. I asked Alex if he could, if let's say we evacuated human beings from Earth, should we instantly destroy the Earth to prevent animals from suffering after we left? I think most people would say that we shouldn't. But if that's the case, we see that it can be good just for those animals to exist even though they suffer. So if we let them exist in spite of suffering, that shows it's highly plausible there are good reasons for God to allow those animals to exist even though they may suffer. So I hope that was a helpful introduction. I would recommend, if you want to go deeper on the subject, go to the Classical Theism podcast hosted by my friend John DeRosa. There are 2 episodes there, episode 126 and 127 at classicaltheism.com. One is The Problem of Animal Suffering with Kyle Keltz, who wrote a book on Thomism and animal suffering. And the other is Father Christopher Steck, a Jesuit theologian, who wrote a book on animal suffering. So Classical Theism podcast, you can hear their different perspectives on the issue. There's another book I think by Michael Murray, Nature Red in Tooth and Claw, that offers others. I think Trent Doherty has a book called All Animals, Great and Small. There are a variety of reasons that are offered, but I think at the end of the day, no atheist has shown God could never have a good reason for allowing animals to endure suffering in this life. And so the problem of evil from animal suffering doesn't succeed. But I hope that's helpful. Check out those resources, and thank you so much for calling in.
Thanks, Connor. Appreciate it. I got to go to a break, and we'll come back with more Answering Atheism with Trent Horn. Trent, I got to just read a quick ad here, Trent. The ad says, "Cy, chat with Trent a bit on what it..." Oh, I'm supposed to chat with you, Trent. Sorry, I wasn't supposed to read the ad. I was supposed to chat with you.
Right here, ready for a chat.
Okay, so tell me something about your upcoming webinar that you're doing. It's a pro-life webinar on June 15th at 5:30 p.m. Pacific. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yes. So I'm going to be doing what I'm hoping, if these seminars garner interest, is to do a series of small group webinars for just a small group of people to sign up so they can have one-on-one time with me. We'll be going over important topics, and I'll be able to do Q&A directly, help to coach people in responses. I want to give people that one-on-one time with me that they might not get. Like at the School of Apologetics, our lectures are pre-recorded. So you can get a lot of content there, but to get that one-on-one time, I wanted to start doing these live virtual seminars for people to take part in, and limited. There's only a few dozen seats that'll be available. So if you want to sign up, you should do it soon. You can sign up for that at TrentHornClasses.com. So if you go to TrentHornClasses.com, TrentHornClasses.com, you can sign up for the live webinar I'll be doing on June 15th for Persuasive Pro-Life. You can also, if you have students who want to do homeschool theology courses live with me, you can sign up there. Only 25 students are allowed for each of those classes. And starting next fall, I'm going to take students over the next 3 semesters through the Catechism, the New Testament. But all of that is at TrentHornClasses.com. Go to the website, and especially for this June 15th seminar, which is capped, you can check that out and sign up and get one-on-one time with me to be coached on pro-life apologetics. So check it out. TrentHornClasses.com. You can go there to sign up.
Trent is our guest. We're talking about answering atheism this hour. Whether you are an atheist, well, first of all, you're very welcome here if you're an atheist, or you're a believer but needs help answering atheist objections. 888-318-7884 is the number to call.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live. The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Prayer is the only truly creative power in the world. God is the only one who can create something out of nothing. And when we pray, we welcome God into our hearts. And once He's there, He's going to do something. He's going to change things. He's going to transform us. He's going to make something out of the nothing that is me. That's the power of prayer for me. It's the only power that's guaranteed to change my life. And the only way I know to make that happen is through prayer.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Trent Horn here as our guest, and that's always fun. That's a great way to spend a Monday afternoon or a Tuesday morning if you're in the Philippines or Guam. I finally found out how far away Guam is, or Australia, or Malaysia. Give me some help, Darren. Japan, Shanghai, China. If you're in any of those places, hello, and thanks for being with us on this Tuesday morning. Answering Atheism, our topic this hour, the number 888-318-7884. How about we go to Rob in Seattle, Washington, listening on Sacred Heart Radio. Rob, thanks for waiting. Go ahead with your atheist, or I don't know, with your question or comments for Trent.
Yeah, so I typically will hear atheists say that extraordinary events like the resurrection require extraordinary evidence, and you can't prove the resurrection with like historical data, biblical sources or non-biblical sources from the first century. So how would I respond to that?
Well, I think the best way to respond is to ask them to define their terms and to defend their assumptions. For example, I would ask them, okay, what do you mean by the word extraordinary? What do you mean extraordinary events? What makes an event extraordinary? Because that's a very subjective term. So yeah, if you are an atheist, for example, to hear someone say, God answered my prayer, that's gonna be a really extraordinary event because you don't believe there is a God. But as a Christian, if somebody told me God answered my prayer, that's not extraordinary at all. Now, it could be a prayer for something that's rather mundane, and so I don't consider it that extraordinary for God to help someone with this, in their life in that regard. So it sounds sensible, but there's a lot of things loaded in there. Say, well, what do you mean by extraordinary? If by extraordinary you just mean miraculous, then why are you making a distinction between miraculous events and non-miraculous events? As if you're saying, well, we know that miraculous events don't happen. How do you know they don't happen? It seems to me, they'll say, well, because we can't believe this miracle happened in history because we have all of this testimony of miracles not happening. How do you know miracles don't happen? Well, because there is no God to cause these miracles. As C.S. Lewis said in his book, Miracles, it's kind of arguing in a circle. So I would say, what do you mean by extraordinary? If you just mean miraculous, then you're kind of begging the question. You're already assuming miracles don't happen. If you're saying that extraordinary events require extraordinary evidence, extraordinary is basically a synonym for miraculous, then what you're saying is miraculous events need miraculous evidence. Well, if that's the case, why would I believe the evidence exists if it's miraculous? You need miraculous evidence for that, and you'd have this infinite regress. And so I feel like the atheist has set up a position where you could never be justified in believing in a miracle, no matter what the evidence is. And you could check out my debate with Matt Dillahunty on this, that, like for Matt, for example, he has never articulated when he would believe in God or believe a miracle had occurred. Because he could, and Lewis talks about this in his book, Miracles, you could always assume you were hallucinating. We know people have hallucinations. So unless you already believe God exists, you're going to be pretty closed off to miracles in the first. So I think when atheists are talking about determining miracles in history, that's why when I debated Dillahunty on the resurrection, in my opening statement, I gave an argument for the existence of God, actually, because that makes it easier to believe miracles can happen if you believe there is a power capable of intervening in the laws of nature. Now, if maybe they'll say, well, we don't mean miraculous, we mean like infrequent. If it doesn't, we've never heard of an event like this happening before, so we need really good evidence for it. But by that logic, you would fail to believe in many historical events. Hannibal crossing the Alps with war elephants that's extraordinary. If I told you I went over the Matterhorn with an elephant, or by the Matterhorn with an elephant, it's pretty extraordinary. And yet we're taking the word of Roman historians that wrote decades later. When the Wright brothers flew an airplane in, 1903? There were scientific papers journal articles that had come out a few years before, saying that heavier than air fixed wing flight would be impossible. And yet, would you believe someone who said, by that logic, at that time, if someone told you I saw the Wright brothers fly a plane, you couldn't believe them because it was so infrequent, even if it was a group of people who produced reliable testimony. So I'd recommend, Rob, when you talk to an atheist about proving whether miracles happen, you got to get them to lay the groundwork to say, all right, by what standard do we use to determine if something happened in the past? When is testimonial evidence allowed? Because that's how we know like 99% of history, especially ancient history, is by testimony. What testimony do we need? Well, if it's multiple accounts and there's evidence they're sincere, like they're willing to be martyred, and we have groups of people, so it's unlikely they're hallucinating, that kind of raises the bar and makes it more likely we can trust the testimony. So you got to get them to explain what they mean by extraordinary events, and then get them to commit to what standard has to be met before you'll believe a certain event happened. Ordinary or extraordinary, any event. What standard has to be made? Finally, I'll say, Rob, it has to be taken into account. Sometimes people will use this analogy. If I told you there was a dog in my garage, you wouldn't need evidence. If I told you there was a dragon in my garage, well, you would need evidence. That's extraordinary. And so it's kind of like the resurrection, right? Well, I would say, yeah, you need good evidence, but not miraculous evidence. In the case, and this is Carl Sagan's example, the late freethinker Carl Sagan, atheist, whatever. Sagan's dragon in the garage. Here's the problem. When someone tells me they have a dragon in their garage, I don't believe them, not just because of lack of evidence, but I have a good reason to believe dragons don't exist, because if they existed, we would see them a lot more. They're a very large animal, and like other large animals, we'd expect to find them in the ecosystem. Since we don't, I'm already very prejudiced. This person does not mean a fire-breathing dragon. If they mean a Komodo dragon, well, maybe. So that's what I would say with the resurrection, though, of like, say, take Jesus's resurrection. We're not, it's not the same as Sagan's dragon, because we don't have evidence that Jesus's resurrection, it did not happen. We don't have testimony saying that the apostles recanted, for example, of their belief that Jesus rose from the dead. Or if dragons existed, we'd see a ton of evidence. And we don't see it, so there's good reason to believe they don't exist. But if Jesus rose from the dead and only appeared to the people described in the New Testament, we would expect the evidence we have now, which are churches, tradition, and sacred writings. So we have the evidence we would expect. The question is, does that evidence, is it strong enough to support that belief? Is it reliable enough? That's what you'd have to pin them on. So I threw a lot out there at you, but is that at least a helpful start to run through that?
Yeah, that was extremely helpful. Thank you.
Okay, super good.
Thanks, Rob. Answering atheism this hour, Trent Horn, our guest, and we go now to Huntington Beach, right here in California. John, listening on the new and improved Catholic Answers Live app in Huntington Beach. Go ahead with your question for Trent Horn.
Sure. Thank you for taking my call. I'll start with a compliment. You guys actually invite atheists to call your show. I'm an atheist. I've called before. You treat people really well. And I find that when I talk to other religious folks outside the Catholic faith, that I get kind of treated like something that just crawled out from under a rock when I tell them, I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist. So I really do appreciate, your willingness to have respectful discourse, I think Trent calls it.
Sure. Thank you, John.
With all of that, with all of that, I called to talk about, oftentimes objective moral values or moral values are kind of brought into the discussion to sort of prove that there's a God.
Sure.
From an atheist worldview, I obviously can't believe that if I don't believe there's a God, then obviously moral values don't come from God, at least in my worldview. So sure. I would have to say that there is no God and all moral values come from human beings, which I think is actually the true situation that they're in. And I'm not saying that's a good situation. I'm not saying that's a situation that I think, that I like. And it seems that there was a divine creator of morality, and we could follow that morality, and that led to flourishing or whatever that divine creator wanted us to be living like. That could potentially be a lot better situation than the situation we're in.
John, let me jump in, and we might have to take a break because we have a hard break coming up in 2 minutes. So I want to carry on the conversation after we return. But I find sometimes the term moral values can be kind of squishy, because in one sense, you could say moral values come from human beings, because a value is something that we desire, we consider important. So just the same as social and cultural and sport values come from humans. But I like the term moral facts, which, related to moral realism. Like, there are just some facts that are true or false, independent of human beings, that humans don't create the moral facts, they discover them. Like, there's a fact, it is wrong to directly kill an innocent human being, or it is wrong to rape people. Those are true, but what makes them true, and can atheists explain that? So I'll recap when we come back, but I would like to chat with you a little more about that.
John, with very kind words for us from Huntington Beach. Thanks. Hang on. We'll just take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Answering Atheism with Trent Horn on Catholic Answers Live.
This is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Thank you for listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Most of us Catholic parents agree our number one goal in life is to pass on the faith to our children. But here's the bad news. Today's world has a million ways to steal your kid's soul. Don't be afraid, says Father Sebastian Walsh. God loves your children even more than you do, and He desires their salvation more than anything. In his groundbreaking new book, Always a Catholic, Father Walsh shows you how to cooperate with God to bring about the fulfillment of His will for your kids. Always a Catholic reminds us that keeping our kids in the faith is about the way we live our Catholicism in our own lives and as a family from day to day. Order your copy of Always a Catholic by visiting shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, answering atheism this hour with our guest, Trent Horn. Trent, the author of a whole bunch of books, including Persuasive Pro-Life, Why We're Catholic, Things the Saints Never Said, Answering Atheism, and many more. This hour, Answering Atheism, our topic. And if you have questions about how to answer a particular atheist objection, you're welcome to call. And if you are an atheist, we'd love to hear from you, 888-318-7884. If you'd like to try to convince us of the foolishness of our ways in believing in God, that's perfectly fine. Or if you just want to challenge some of our thinking, very welcome. 888-318-7884. We were talking with John in Huntington Beach before we went to the break, and we don't have John on the line anymore. So John, call back. If we dropped you, I apologize for that. But Trent, you wanted to finish up your response to John's question about the relationship between belief in God and morals.
Yeah, so it's interesting that John said, well, if morals might only come from human beings, I may not like it, but that's just the way it is. I would say, well, why should we believe that? We have very deep-seated understandings of what morals are. And my view would be that moral facts are things we discover, we don't create. We do get better. We can get better at understanding morality, so we can make moral progress, just like we make mathematical progress, even though we don't create mathematics. So I would say that when we're talking about morality in this vein and understanding it, we can root it back to what's just been brought up to say, all right, should we strive for moral progress? But if we're talking about progress, it's like, well, if like I would ask you this, have we made fashion progress? So that's pretty subjective. Some people would say yes. Some people would say, I wish we went back to top hats and tailcoats. fashion just changes. It's not progress, really. But morality, we would say we've made progress in areas and we've made regress in other areas, like with the protection of the unborn. But progress and regress only makes sense if there's an objective standard that is beyond what human beings come up with. And to me, since morality is something that involves persons, whatever this is beyond humans that is the grounding of morality, it itself would have to be personal in nature. So it couldn't be a force. It couldn't be an abstract idea. It would have to be some kind of infinite person that just is goodness itself. And so I think that makes sense in the classical view of God as just perfect goodness, the perfect act of being.
John, again, the invitation is there if you'd like to call back, and we'll continue. Oh, John's back. Okay, John, go ahead.
Did you hear that, John?
Oh yeah, I heard most of what Trent said, not 100% of it, and I'm blaming Cy Kellett for dropping my call, but
that's actually seems pretty reasonable, John. That seems like a reasonable position to take.
Anyway, I think that I did hear a little bit what Trent was talking about. I don't really find this an argument that convinces me that there is or might be a God. It really sounds to me like an argument why people would want there to be a God for sure. And why they might make up that there's a God. But if you're an atheist, and it does seem to me that atheists really struggle with this. Like, they just can't admit that moral values, if there is no God, that they're not intrinsic, they're not eternal, they're not perfect, that they would change all the time. I would say that that's what we actually are seeing occurring with human moral values. But as an atheist, human moral values have to come from human beings. There wouldn't be a God source for those moral values. So that would be my worldview.
Okay, John, do you think that humans, like I was bringing up before, human beings make moral progress?
Yeah, I didn't catch all of that. That was a very interesting thing you were talking about. I agree with you. We make moral progress depending on the culture at the time, the time frame. You could look at, it depends on what your definition of moral progress even is. If we're becoming less violent, people are living longer lives, and you're seeing more human flourishing, absolutely we're making really strong moral progress without question.
Well, wait, then let me ask, but then that kind of kicks the can down the road, saying that let's take it, do you think it's a fact human beings ought to be less violent? And that fact is true?
A great question. The wording that you put in it makes it difficult for me to answer, but I would say yes, I believe that is true, that less human violence against other humans is a good thing, a sign of moral progress. I don't think that comes from God. I think that comes from people, from human beings, from societies and cultures. And it's not perfect. I admit it's not perfect.
But I think, John, and what's interesting here is I would agree with you that if you just start kind of like what Sam Harris does with morality, say, okay, we know what facts lead to the human species flourishing or not. And so you could make a kind of evolutionary argument that when you're less violent, we get more reproduction, we get more stable societies. But what I'm concerned about is, for me, I think there are different aspects of morality that don't make sense if there is no God. So, for example, do you think, here's one I'm going to try out, and we'll just see how it goes. Do you think human beings are morally responsible for their behavior in a way that is different from other animals?
I do. When you talk about Sam Harris, to me, he gets really heady, and it seems to me like he's trying to come up with a way to say, yes, we can come up with objective moral values. And I kind of reject that. I'm more like, hey, let's face the facts. Morality.
So you're like a pragmatic relativist.
Yeah, I guess I'm pragmatic. But to answer your question directly, we have a pretty significantly developed intellect. And I would say that it's much more developed than that of a dog or a lion or something like that. So with our developed intellect, I would think, yes, we are morally responsible for the decisions that we make, and we're responsible for the consequences that those decisions create. And that's where I think...
Sure. Well, John, let me ask you the next question then. If we're morally responsible and these other animals are not, aren't like a dog, a gorilla, a lightning bolt, us, aren't the things we do all caused by the same thing? which are just atomic reactions that are purposeless. If all of our actions are caused by the same thing, why are humans uniquely morally responsible if we're all made of and moved by the same stuff?
Again, a great question. I mean, obviously, a lightning bolt is just caused by the forces of nature. A lion, may have some sense of morality, but we can't communicate with lions. Why humans are, we do have conscience, we do have intelligence, we have capabilities that other animals don't have. Learning from mistakes, communicating.
I want to drill down a little bit. So a lightning bolt are electrons and atoms in motion. A tiger, at the most, you get most basic level, you've got hormones and chemicals, which are atoms and electrons in motion. So it seems like to me, we're all either equally morally irresponsible or equally responsible if we're all made of the same stuff. Otherwise, you're correct. We do have capabilities. I'm not sure what that, we have certain functions, but then it's like, but what causes us to have those functions if we're all, once again, like, can you cite something we're made of that is different from these other creatures that don't have moral responsibility? To me, that's the hard part for me. If we're all made of the same stuff, moving in the same direction, yet we're special, I don't see how that could be unless maybe there's something immaterial about us that's different. I guess that's the quandary I have, and I'll let you have the last word to get your thought on that.
Sure. I mean, you're really articulating your point of view well. I just don't agree with that point of view. And to me, just my worldview, it sounds more like you're trying to convince me that wouldn't it be better if there were a God? And I would agree with you. Yeah, that would be better, but that's not necessarily the truth. If you're looking for the truth, then I would say that our morality, it's not eternal. It's really just man-made based on what I've already kind of talked about. And that's just where we're at. That's just the truth of the situation from an atheist worldview, which I do think is the truth. And I recognize that there's a lot of people that very strongly disagree with me on that.
Sure.
I'm not arguing that atheism is great. It's actually pretty bad. But it is, in my opinion, the true thing, regardless of what we would like to be true.
You would make Nietzsche proud. We have the madman with the lantern. We have killed God, and how cold we have become as we're unchained from the sun. A lot of people quote Nietzsche saying, we've killed God, but actually the madman, thus spake Zarathustra, that comes from is pretty pessimistic and kind of depressing. But John, thanks for calling. I would love for you to call back. Maybe it might be fun if we do atheism again and you call back. You could share an argument or evidence for God you think has the most promise and where it falls short. And then maybe we could chat about that another time. But I'm grateful you called and hope you'll call back again.
Thanks, John. We got to take a quick break, Trent. We'll come back with there's a bunch more callers. We're talking about answering atheism, whether you're an atheist and you'd like some answers to your questions about our theism, or if you're a fellow believer and you'd like some help answering the objections that you hear to atheism, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. This is strange, but my book is on sale. It's so weird to talk that way. You can get it right now at 25% off at shop.catholic.com by using the promo code TEACHME at checkout. It's a teacher of strange things, who Jesus was, what he taught, and why people still follow him. A book intended to be put in anyone's hands who wants to know the basics about Jesus, but also maybe wants to know what it means to know Jesus. You can see the difference there, knowing the basics about Jesus and knowing Jesus. 25% off right now at shop.catholic.com when you use the promo code TEACHME.
It's all about the truth. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
EWTN, helping people grow in their love and understanding of God.
I just wanted to thank you for your show. It's made such a huge difference in my faith life, because if you don't know why you're doing things and you're just going through the motions, it's totally pointless. But if you know why, it's infinitely meaningful. So you really helped me make a 180.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Do you want to end abortion, halt the attack on traditional marriage, and ensure religious freedom for ourselves and for our grandchildren? To do this, we must convert the culture. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a grassroots initiative that recognizes this need and takes it to the streets. If you're interested in peacefully sharing the gospel in your area, visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Trent Horn, our guest. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and we're answering atheism. If you need some answers for atheism, or if you are in fact an atheist yourself, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. Trent, we go now to Columbus, Ohio, where Mary Alice is listening on 820 AM St. Gabriel Radio. Mary Alice, thank you for your patience. Go ahead with your question or comment for Trent Horn.
Yes. Hello. How are you both?
Very well. Thank you, Mary Alice.
Good. In response or a comment to your first caller about animals and pain that they may experience, and I'm a born and raised cradle Catholic, and I don't have any problem believing in God, but between the atheists and the animal rights activists, in talking with a very good friend of mine years ago, he made the statement that animals do not have rights because they do not have responsibilities. And when I thought about that, I thought that's a very valid and very succinct, in my view, I don't know, a very succinct analysis of whether or not animals have rights. And sadly, yes, they experience pain, but so do human beings, which leads me to my next question. Why are people so geared towards wanting to protect animals and all that, and don't seem to be concerned about human beings?
All right, Trent?
Yeah, I would say that the framework of whether animals have rights, that depends on what you mean by the term rights. Some people use rights-based language to describe morality and how we ought to treat one another. But there are other people, in fact, the use of rights-based language is fairly recent. Throughout the history of Catholic moral theology, rights were not as important as virtues or natural order. So I think when it comes to animals, we would say they don't have rights in the same way humans have rights because they're not moral agents. They cannot discern what the good is. And so they do not have the same rights you and I have, but because also they're not made in the image and likeness of God, and so they don't possess intrinsic value just because of what they are. They don't have the same intrinsic dignity human beings have. They have value in the sense that God created them, and what God creates is good, but they don't have the same intrinsic dignity that human beings have by virtue of being created in the image and likeness of God. Now, that does not mean, however, we can treat animals however we like. Animals may not be moral agents, but they are moral patients. We could say that we have a moral duty to treat animals in a certain way, that we ought not be not be cruel to them. We should not inflict suffering upon an animal just for the sake of causing suffering. Now, there's nothing immoral about eating an animal, for example, though people might have debates about whether the ways we use to farm, cultivate, breed animals might have unnecessary amounts of suffering in it, and people can debate about that. But we should be kind to animals because God has given us a spirit of kindness, made in his image and likeness. As the other question, why are atheists, they seem focused on animal rights rather than human rights? I think many atheists would say they care a lot about human rights. They care a lot about born people, quote unquote LGBT rights, things like that. Their framework for morality, however, because it's not rooted in divine revelation or natural law, it's usually rooted in utilitarianism, the belief that, well, we ought to maximize pleasure and minimize suffering. And so if they look at that, they want to make animals not suffer. They don't want born human beings to suffer. But they might think the unborn or someone in a persistent vegetative state is incapable of suffering. And so it's not really wrong to kill them. You can't harm them if they can't suffer. Really, the problem here with atheists and animals is not just about animals. It's about what is your fundamental moral view. Is it that there are certain natural laws, the natural law that tells us how we ought to treat one another, that we ought not use human beings as means, treat them as ends, don't kill innocent people, even if that'll make things better for everybody else? Is that your view, or is it going to be, well, we want to maximize utility, and that could lead to all kinds of unfortunate consequences? It really gets down to the foundation of what your moral framework is to explain many of the differences between atheists and the non-religious. But don't take that as a blanket statement. There are atheists who are pro-life. There are Christians who support abortion. So it's all about getting down to the root of the individual's moral framework. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you for calling.
Thanks, Mary Alice. Thanks very much. Answering Atheism this hour with Trent Horn, our guest. We go now to New Orleans, Louisiana. Peter, listening on 690 AM. You are up next, Peter. Go ahead with your question or comment for Trent Horn.
Hey, I'm a massive Trent Horn fan, so thank you guys.
Thank you, Peter.
I am a Catholic. Yeah, I'm a Catholic, but I do wrestle with like some skepticism of, which I know it's healthy to be skeptic, but
sure.
I guess like the resurrection and like things like that, like the virgin birth and all that kind of stuff is weird to me because I like Catholicism for the moral system. I think that there's no other religion in the whole world that like hits like all of the right points. I like theology of the body a lot, but like for me, what's hard for me is like Jesus Christ, like that there was a man who was God. And I think that the best evidence I heard was when, and maybe it was you, but it was somebody in apologetics said something about if it wasn't true, why did all of these people die for it? Like the apostles, like St. Peter, my namesake, like being crucified upside down. And I'm like, yeah, that's crazy, like to endure that suffering unless you really believed it. But then it made me, I mean, there's so much these days of people believing insane things, and I feel like they would go to their death for it. And you see some people, like suicide bombers, they'll go to their death believing in something that's totally wrong. So I don't know if you wanted to help clear that up for me, because that used to be really compelling evidence to me, but I feel like it's kind of hard with like all of the things that are obviously incorrect now.
Right, and I think, Peter, that the argument is poorly formulated, that this can happen a lot in apologetics for the resurrection. So let me clear it up for you. Martyrdom is not evidence for the truth claims of a religion. It is evidence for the sincerity of those who hold to the truth claims. So it's part of a multi-step process in proving something like the resurrection. So it's not, you're right, if martyrdom were evidence for the truth of one's religion directly, then Muslim suicide bombers, Hindu suicide bombers, I think I might be confusing. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of I don't know if they're Hindu suicide bombers. The Tamil Tigers, who are in that same area, are a secular group that commits suicide bombs. The Jonestown cult, it would prove all these other religions. Rather, what it does is that if someone willingly chooses to be a martyr or to endure persecution, that is strong evidence that they are sincere. So it has to be willing. So, for example, at Jonestown, the mass suicide there, a lot of it is, I think, the cult leaders have their AK-47s and their guns, and people have to kind of go along with it. But when you have someone like Christianity, where you are going through a decades-long process of being persecuted by Jews and Romans, by your fellow Jews, I should say, where you could always leave or recant, you're willing to endure it. That shows sincerity. And you're right. Now, let's take a Muslim suicide bomber. Let's say he flies into a building because of because of his belief in the Quran or his interpretation of it. That only shows he's sincere. Because he's dying for a lie, but he sincerely believes it's true. But he has no way of knowing if it's true or not, because he wasn't around 1,400, 1,300 years ago when Muhammad was alive. The apostles, however, the fact they're willing to be persecuted and martyred shows that they are sincere, okay? They really believe this, and they're able to know if it's true or not. So they're definitely not lying. There could be another explanation. They could be sincerely hallucinating, but I don't think that's a good explanation because Jesus appeared to groups of them. They're able to check his empty tomb to see if they're hallucinating. I don't think that's a good explanation. So I would say that martyrdom shows sincerity, and if you're sincere and you are able to determine whether or not it's true or false, and you continue sincerely believing, that's good evidence that it's true. And I think we only find that in Christianity. So that'd be my start of rehabilitating that kind of argument. Does that make sense, or do you have any clarifying questions?
Yeah, I gotta say I love your answer there. That brings a lot of clarity, and it gives me a lot of peace as well. And if I could, I would ask, it would be awesome if you could say a prayer for me too, because I haven't been to Mass in a while, and I've just been struggling a little bit with my faith. So, yeah, thank you so much for that answer, though.
I will. Well, Peter, don't hang up. Yeah, don't hang up on us. I want you to give your email address to our call screener, because I would like to send you. I would like to send you 2 books. One is my book on Jesus, Counterfeit Christs, and it has a lot of these arguments I shared with you. I think that is a great book to learn about the person of Jesus and the apologetics. But then I would like to send you another book to really enter into the mystery of who Jesus is. A book that I recently wrote called Jesus, a Teacher of Strange Things. I've been working on this book for a while. I'm just kidding.
Nope.
Our host here, Cy Kellett, wrote Jesus. Is it Jesus, a teacher of strange things, or just a teacher of strange things?
No, but that's what it should have been. Now you tell me, Trent. Now that the book's already
It's called
out.
A Teacher of Strange Things?
And then the subtitle is Who Jesus Was, What He Did, and Why People Still Follow Him.
Okay, so Teacher of Strange Things. So, Peter, stay on the line. We will give you Counterfeit Christ, Teacher of Strange Things. We will have that sent to you. And then, Lord, I just pray that you send your Spirit upon Peter and give him grace, courage, and conviction to be able to return to the faith, to be able to go and make a good confession, and to then go to Mass and receive you in the Eucharist. And I'll ask that our listeners will pray for you as well. Everyone, if you're listening, just say it right now. It'll take you 5 seconds, people. Say it right now. Pray for Peter that he can return to the faith and do in full communion with Christ and his church. 5 seconds. Do it right now. That's hundreds of thousands of prayers. That's got to count for something. And I hope you'll call back again.
I hope we get to talk with you again soon, Peter. I got to go to Kat in Terryville, Michigan, listening on 90.3 FM. Kat, you there with us?
I am, yes.
All right, go ahead.
Hi. So I don't think I would technically consider myself an atheist. I'm not trying to sound cliche. I believe more in the universe, and I do believe in the power of prayer, no matter what your religion is. I do believe that when people come together, something great happens. With that said, I've never been to church. I have been to church a few times. Unfortunately, I had a really rough childhood. I would like to think I'm a special case because my mother would use churches to get in good with the pastor, and then she would seduce them and end up being with them, and then
I'm sorry to hear that.
I'm not kidding you. Once it was a whole thing. But now, I'm about to be 30 years old, and my 9-year-old daughter is asking questions that I don't know how to answer. And she's very curious. And I am so ignorant to everything Catholic Christianity.
Sure. Well, Kat, listen to me, because we're running up against the clock. So what I want to do is I want to stay on the line, give our call screener your email address and your contact information. Stay on the line, and I will send you 2 books. Why We're Catholic is a primer to introduce you to everything. And then I think you and your daughter would benefit by learning about the person of Jesus. I want to send you Cy's new book, Teacher of Strange Things. Stay on the line. Give us your contact info. We'll send you Why We're Catholic and Teacher of Strange Things, and then call back if you ever have any other questions, all right? But thanks for calling in.
I'm so sorry that we had so little time for such a beautiful call. Kat, we're going to do open forum tomorrow and Thursday. We do it Tuesdays and Thursdays most weeks. If you want to call back and continue the conversation, we'd love to have that conversation with you. I hope you will stay on the line, get the 2 books, and then call this week, next week, whenever you feel like calling again. Trent Horn has been our guest. Thanks, Trent.
Thank you, Cy.
All right, we'll see you tomorrow. I wish we had more time with Kat. We'll see you tomorrow, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.